Well, I am a student right now and not a professional nutrition communicator or scientific researcher. I've already felt frustrated over the reluctance of some of my family and friends to accept scientific messages I have shared with them related to nutrition. This article was extremely interesting because it discussed those frustrations on a larger scale as they relate to science communicators and the reluctance of policymakers and the general public in accepting harsh realities as they relate to controversial topics in public health like obesity, vaccines, and climate science. Clearly, something isn't clicking as it relates to science being communicated to policymakers and to the general public. So much so that the National Academies of Science held a 2 day conference in Washington, D.C. in 2017 in order to address these communication challenges as well as how to combat them. In my opinion, one of the most important points brought up at the conference was the fact that people rarely make decisions based on science alone. They rely on anecdote, emotion, beliefs, and so on. Generally, people are going to believe themselves and their past experiences over some new information that someone is telling them. Another point at the conference that had profound impact was our job is the betterment of humankind, and if the public isn't aboard, why are we doing this? This point really hit home for me, and I began to wonder to myself if the public really isn't being convinced about the integrity of scientific findings, then why do scientists even bother communicating them? Why am I bothering to learn about nutrition science if there are going to be a large majority of patients who don't believe what I'm saying? This is an extremely complex question, but it is so important in improving scientific communication, in my case, as it relates to nutrition science. So much of the conflict or pushback that arises from policymakers and the larger population as it relates to scientific evidence is the fact that trust is fragile. In the world that we live in, where social media and cable TV are at our fingertips, it's not so much that scientists aren't trustworthy, but that they're competing with those who are not scientists who are spreading false information. What I gathered from this article, as well as from my own perspective, is that people don't want to believe what they don't want to believe. This is why we see such pushback in areas like climate change, obesity, and childhood vaccines, because they're controversial topics that people don't want to believe to be true. Going off of that, I think that in order to improve scientific communication in general, that it is so important to embrace narrative and human life themes in conveying scientific messages. If an expert in a scientific field comes across as unrelatable and shares a scientific finding in a way that is misunderstood by the general public, why would they want to believe it or give any merit to it? While social media can be dangerous as it relates to spreading misinformation, I think it has the potential to be extremely beneficial. Generally, on social media platforms, experts are relatable. They talk about scientific topics, like those related to nutrition, while they're at home making coffee or getting ready to go somewhere. This type of relatable content paired with factual scientific information can help to build trust with the public as it makes scientists more relatable. This relates to communicating effectively to patients as well. As a care provider, I wouldn't want my patient to think of me as unrelatable. If my patient can relate to me and understand why I'm intertwining a type of nutrition therapy into my own life for the betterment of my health, it might make him or her more willing to try it in his or her own life. I don't think that we will ever be able to fully tackle this issue, but the more emphasis that we as scientists place on building trust with our patients or with the general public, the more we will begin to see a positive shift as it relates to scientific communication.